Before we dive in, I want to give a quick heads up that this episode includes a discussion about eating disorders. If that's a sensitive topic for you, feel free to skip ahead or take breaks as needed. And if you or someone you know is struggling, you can find support at nationaleatingdisorders.org. Now, on to the episode. Welcome to the Adaptive Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Hotho. On today's episode, I'm going to sit down with Sydney Peterson. Sydney is a neuromuscular major adaptive athlete who competes in CrossFit and is broadening her horizons, as you'll hear about in our conversation. Sydney has cerebral palsy, just like me. Only unlike me, where my CP affects the right side of my body, Sydney's CP affects her lower limbs. Now, March is CP Awareness Month, and so all throughout this month, on Mondays, we're going to be featuring athletes who have CP on this podcast. You're going to hear from athletes who are in the CrossFit space and beyond, and what their athletic endeavors are like with cerebral palsy. You may not know this, but CP is the most common childhood disability. Many of us, it happened at or around the time of our births, so we haven't known life without CP. And there's a lot of resources out there for kids with CP, but there's really a gap in healthcare for adults with CP. And we're going to raise some of that in the conversations about how we navigate life with CP, some of the hangups that come with that, but ultimately how finding fitness and functional fitness of confidence. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with Sydney. Sydney, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And today is a big day, and I'm really glad you're here on this show because this is our first show in March, which is CP Awareness Month. So, Sydney, just like me, you've got CP. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I was born 3 months premature, and at some point along the way, I lost oxygen to my brain. So for me, what that resulted in is some gait issues from like my hips down. And so I have trouble with balance, coordination, and then just my gait is a little bit stiff when I walk. And I'm not at all flexible, or I don't have a whole lot of mobility, but that's kind of how it presents for me. So as far as my upper body goes, like, not humble brag, I'm a little bit jacked, but my lower half, definitely, that's how my CP kind of presents as far as like what it looks like.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really funny that happens in adaptive athletics sometimes is you'll meet somebody who's in the adaptive community, you'll hop on their Instagram page, and you'll be like, I wonder what they've got. And then I was like looking at her like, she's like really jacked. That is, I actually thought that. I was like, okay. And then you were doing that strict ring muscle up, and I was like, okay,
Yes.
Yeah.
That's been 5 years in the making. No joke. I've been stuck in that transition like this for 5 years. And I finally got my hips to move ever slow. Like, I'm not even kidding. Just like a minuscule behind the rings so that I could finally turn over. And it was like, oh my God. It was so exciting.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even think about the role your hips would play in getting into that turnover position.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course it's strict, right? So you're not kipping.
Sure.
So like there is that. Like I knew I could be strong enough eventually, but there is kind of that shift that has to happen. If you think about if you're far in front and you've got your legs out in front of you and like you can't kind of start to shift your lower so that it's even just like in line with your upper half, it becomes really hard to turn over to get the dip. Because I knew as soon as I turned over, that dip is no problem. It was just that transition. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I was sure a dip would be no problem if you're, if you're used to probably doing ring dips all the time.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go back before you were hitting ring muscle ups, and let's talk about what it was like growing up with your particular form of CP.
As far as like growing up is concerned, like it was pretty challenging. I would say more so in high school, once I got to high school. But like I have a really supportive group of friends growing up that I've known since I was like 5 years old. So I was kind of like always had that built-in friend group, which was really great in terms of like I didn't have to deal with like a whole lot of bullying or like anything like that. But it got hard once I got to high school in terms of like watching all my friends go on to play sports that they really love, and they had that team dynamic and that community building. And I did feel like I kind of missed out on that, which was unfortunate, but I learned how to stay active in other ways.
Yeah, you were telling me you started going to the gym when you were like 15. What was that like going to the gym with CP?
I didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest with you. I remember I got a trainer, and they did as much as they could to help me. and I did just a lot of cardio, that's really all I knew. I did like push-ups and stuff, but I never really picked up a barbell, or if I did do dumbbell things, it was all like, curls or presses.
Hmm.
I didn't really do a whole lot of dynamic things, but I did what I could at the time with the resources that I had, just to stay as active as I could while my friends were off playing sports. So yeah, that concept of like kind of taking ownership of my own health and fitness without having to rely on external forces like a sports team and having to show up to practice. I learned that at maybe a younger age than most do.
Yeah, you would say it's like a discipline. You learned a sense of
Yeah.
discipline of training and taking care of yourself. And
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you have to be particularly or get in the way, particularly with CP, when you're trying to train or strength train?
I would say balance and coordination is a big one. Like you could maybe nudge me like this and I might fall over, like just depending on how much force is applied. So I think that's a big one. And then just, I do have like a harder time building muscle in my lower body. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to stop training lower body movements. It just means that I do have to accept that there is, I'm going to have smaller calves and my quads. I'm going to be a little bit capped out as far as what I can do from like a body composition standpoint in my lower half.
Hmm.
But I would say balance and coordination are the things that I have to navigate and be very aware of, and constantly kind of have my brain really turned on in order to execute certain movements, which causes a different level of exhaustion, I would say. When you can't just move, you have to think really hard and move at the
Hmm.
same time. So there's definitely a lot I've learned as far as like nutrition and recovery to be
Hmm.
able to kind of keep doing this at the level that I like to.
So training in the gym, you're doing this by yourself, kind of while your friends are on sports teams. You said high school was hard, though. Tell me a little bit about what made high school a little bit harder.
Oh, all my friends are dating boys, and like nobody liked me because I was different.
Mm.
Like it was like, or like there were things looking back now where I was like, wow, like why did I do that? Or like I can, as an adaptive athlete now, what I've learned is like better able to advocate for myself. So if I'm going out with my friends, like I'm going to raise my hand if their idea of an activity is like, hey, let's go for a hike. Well, like I would put myself through that agony and that pain. Like I'm not,
Mm.
hiking is just an example, but like to be with my friends and like hang out with my friends and try to keep up without realizing like the exhaustion and the toll that that was taking. And I didn't know how to advocate for myself, because for me, it wasn't about advocating with the disability back then. It was more about just keep up and like make sure you do everything you can to feel included. But I didn't realize that in being included could look different. And I could raise my hand and say, hey, I'm tired, or that's not the best thing for me to be doing. Can we try something else where like I can actually enjoy myself because I'm not exhausted just trying to keep up with everybody.
We just didn't want to be an issue. We didn't want to
Right. An
cause,
inconvenience.
yeah, an
Yeah.
inconvenience. Exactly. Yeah. I remember youth group trips we would take and we would go hiking. And when you said hiking, I was like, oh my gosh, I remember from high school. Like it would just be like, let's go hike. And my right leg would inevitably like trip on something or slip down a rock or, that kind of thing. And I'd fall. I mean, do you fall
I
sometimes?
fall. I do fall. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon for me at the gym to like trip on the mats because they shrink in the
Hmm.
winter and then they expand in the summer when it gets hot. So I'll just be walking and then all of a sudden I just like hit a lip and I just trip. Everybody
Yeah.
knows that that's just what happens now. It's not a big deal. But like, yeah, I fall sometimes. Absolutely. I fall a lot less since starting to do CrossFit, which is awesome. But
And I think that's a great transition point because actually I experienced the same thing, much better coordination and less
yeah.
trips and falls. So tell me about starting CrossFit.
Yeah, so I started CrossFit in 2017. They opened a box, like we could walk there from where our house was at the time. And my husband started first. We got married, and then I started shortly after, like a month after our wedding. And I fell in love with it pretty quickly. And I just started to like think about my body really differently. I started to like feel such pride. And I stopped dreading going to the gym. Like
Mhm.
before CrossFit, going to the gym was a chore. It was like this thing I felt like I had to do. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have a whole lot of structure to it. I wasn't training, I was just going to the gym. But once I started CrossFit, I was feeling a lot more like I don't have to do this. I like can't wait to do this.
You also did some competitive CrossFit for a little bit. Were
Yeah.
you were you kind of feeling like you wanted to, because you said you hadn't done sports, but you'd been
Yep.
training, but then you saw that like I love this thing CrossFit and it has sort of a competitive side and you were interested in trying that out, or what led you to try
Yeah.
competitive CrossFit?
I wanted to be involved in the adaptive community. I wanted to meet people who had a mutual understanding. I think just empathy can go a long way, and just being around people who get it is really empowering. And I don't have that where I live. I'm the only
Hmm.
adaptive athlete in my gym. And so I was like, hey, let's give this a shot and see what I can do. And, I'll get really strong in the process because I'll have to do things that perhaps I can't do right now. Like I remember when I did my first wheel wad workout, I had never done a burpee from the floor before.
Hmm.
I had always used a box and elevated that range of motion a little bit to keep myself moving quickly, but I had never thought to do a burpee in a workout, even though a burpee by definition is just getting yourself off the floor, which I do many times in my life if I fall, right?
Yeah.
But I had never thought about it as like, I always thought like, oh, I have to play it safe and make sure like my body's in a good position to do burpees quickly. So I would always use a box. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I think there are
Hmm.
days where I'm like, my back hurts. I'm going to grab this box and today I'm going to do, almost like a plank burpee
Yeah.
instead of a full burpee. But yeah, there were movements that I had never done before that if I hadn't started competing, I probably never would have even thought to have tried. And it sort of pushed me out of my comfort zone and opened up like this different world of intensity that made me feel, for the most part, really strong and like really capable.
Yeah. Was there anything else that you discovered through doing CrossFit?
I would say that the biggest thing for me is throughout my entire 20s, for about a decade, I struggled with an eating disorder to the point of being hospitalized 3 times. And so it was a really dark time for me. And I'll be honest, when I first stepped into CrossFit, I was like kind of in that middle ground where it was like I was at a crossroad, right? Like I could go back to what I've always done and like continue that cycle of like in and out of treatment, or I can try to figure out a way to fix this. And when I first started CrossFit, I thought it would fuel my eating disorder. And so I was like, at the time, excited about that. I use that in air quotes because, of course, nobody's excited to have an eating disorder, but it was like a way to kind of, I guess, like hide it or disguise it in
Hmm.
a different way. But what I found was the exact opposite happened. And it made me feel like I wanted to do as much as I could to fuel myself to do better, to do even better at this.
Yeah.
And I ended up putting on 20 pounds, which pretty much for me was like all muscle. Um, and I've haven't looked back. So I wouldn't like, I would say, I don't know where I would be if not for CrossFit. I think I would be probably okay enough, but I wouldn't be happy in the body that I have. And today I can confidently say that because of CrossFit, like I don't have those obsessive food thoughts. I don't hate the body that I live in. Like I feel so confident and so strong, and I just want to keep getting better.
What would you say to someone? This is the first time we've had eating disorders come up on this podcast, but what
Yeah.
would you say to someone who is struggling with an eating disorder or knows someone who is? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, of course, seek professional help. But aside from that, like you really need to start being truthful. I think once I started being honest about like the secrets that I was keeping, and I started to really hold myself accountable for the behaviors and that cycle was when it really started to shift. And of course, CrossFit really helped with that. So I would say, like, yeah, seek professional help, start really being honest with yourself and with the people around you. Have one or two people that you really, really trust who you can lean on when like you're kind of at that crossroad, or if you've had a slip up. Of course, I've had plenty of them, and I was able to kind of trust a really small circle of people to say, hey, I raised my hand and like I'm struggling right now, like I need to lean on you a little bit more, or maybe you can help me, like maybe I can, like you can be my accountability buddy, or whatever it might be. And so I would say honesty is a really big one, and find yourself a community of people. I think for me it was CrossFit's not for everybody, but once I started being around a community of people who celebrate being really strong in every chapter of life, whether you're 20, 30, or a mom of 2 or 3, it's like everybody I'm around, we're not looking in the mirror obsessing about our bodies. We're just trying to lift heavier weights and run fast, or you know move faster. I think that really, and once I started to find a form of exercise that I really loved, that put me in that headspace of wanting to be stronger, not smaller, was when that permanent shift, it was like, oh yeah, I'm never going back to my eating disorder.
Yeah. And I looked on your Instagram, you're now doing nutrition coaching. Do you feel like
Yeah.
that is a sort of, this might be too religious, but sort of a redemption arc of what you've been through, or your way of sort of giving back to the community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's 2 parts. Being an adaptive athlete, I think there's a lot we should be doing with our nutrition, and there's a little bit of a gap there that I've seen when I've been at competitions. And then also just having that eating disorder history really puts me in a place of deep understanding. And I've gone through a lot of struggles in my life, like outside of just disability and eating disorder. I won't get into all of that today, but there were some really, really dark times. And so my kind of mantra is like, if I can do it, I want to help it. Like, why can't you do it? Like I want to help as many people as I can. And it is kind of a redemption story of like, I've gotten to this point because I really started taking my health seriously, and I made it a priority, and I want to be able to help other people do the same thing.
How can people find out about your nutrition program?
Yeah, so look me up on Instagram. I still have my name as my handle, which is Sydney_Peterson. But my business is called Ever Adapt Nutrition. So it's fairly new. I've only launched it within the last month, but you'll start to see more coming out soon. That kind of is like my first official, like I would say, soft launch. But I am accepting clients, so DM me on Instagram if you want to chat.
Awesome. I love that your nutrition program and this podcast are like birthday twinsies. Both started about a month ago.
Perfect.
Perfect.
I love that.
Lots of great ideas coming out at the start of February. Going back to competitive CrossFit for 1 second, I asked you sort of an awkward question during our pre-interview. I said, why don't you just compete as seated? Because your disability is primarily in your lower half. And I just, I'm an adaptive athlete, but also as I was asking the question, you were responding, I was like, there's a bit of like ignorance in that question. And so I'm just going to own that for a second, but help me understand why that's hard, right? To say to somebody whose impairment could be done seated, but all the reasons that you gave me before of like, no, that doesn't make any sense for me.
Yeah, it doesn't, because it's not the way that I organically navigate the world. And so I don't use a wheelchair, and I don't use crutches of any kind. And so while I do have significant impact to my gait, I walk in my everyday life. I can jog a little bit and I'll run if, a bear is trying to track me down. But yeah, so it just like competing seated would require me to get a wheelchair, which is expensive. And it would require me to learn so much about how to compete, how to even move through the world with a wheelchair. So it wouldn't really translate for me. So while I do kind of consider myself like a little bit of a hybrid in that way, I'm a little bit of a unique case, I would say. And I do some movement seated sometimes if my lower half is just feeling too much strain. But as far as competing is concerned, like it just wouldn't really work.
Yeah. Thanks for your kindness when I asked that question earlier.
No, not at all.
I think sometimes as adaptive athletes, people will ask us questions sometimes, and you're like, "Oh, no, it doesn't work that way."
Yeah.
And then when you're like, "Oh, I'd have to learn how to use a wheelchair," I'm like, "Oh, right, of course." Like using a wheelchair is a skill.
Have you seen how fast they go?
Yes.
Like I would be left in the dust.
Yes. And the wheelies that they had to do in 25.1, like just balance yourself, and and
Yeah.
roll on. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Speaking of 25.1, you did 25.1. How did it
hmm
go?
It went great. I finished the round of 21, and then I got 7 burpees in the round of the next round.
28.
24? 20,
Yeah, 24.
yeah,
Yeah.
24.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Really well
So
done.
not bad.
Nice
Thank
work.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I love a good grind. Like I am
Yeah.
inefficient and I will own that. Like my movements are not efficient just with the way that my gait kind of is. But one thing I pride myself on is my engine and my ability to just do the grunt work. And so with a long workout like that, I don't mind it.
That's great. That's great. And you
Yeah.
are getting into other long workouts as well, it sounds
Yes.
like. What are you going to be
Yeah.
doing in April?
I'm going to Miami to do my first ever Hyrox race. Yeah, like I said, I run away from barbells and I run towards machines and gymnastics. And while there's no gymnastics in Hyrox, I'll take all the machines I can get.
Hmm.
So I'm really excited to give it a try. I'll be honest, I'm scared about the running just because that's not really a healthy thing for me to do, just as far as the compounding impact to my lower half.
Hmm.
But I figure I'm just gonna walk and run and kind of mix it up, and just do what I can once my spasticity kind of sets in
Yeah.
on the running to get it done. And then I'm really looking forward to just kind of seeing what's possible and seeing how it goes. Like I said, I love the machines. I love the rower. I love the ski. I'm not particularly fast at them, but I'm just looking forward to kind of that long grind. Like I love the idea of like going for like an hour and a half. I
Hmm.
know that sounds awful for most people. I don't know where I got this. It's a little bit of a sickness, but you know,
I think
like I
it's a
said,
I think it's a good mental grind though, right? CrossFitters don't do long time domain workouts very often,
yeah.
if ever. And Murph might be the longest one we do. So I
And
think
I
it's
will
good.
say, there is a misconception, and again, this kind of makes me like an interesting case, but like a lot of people I know in the neuro world experience neuro crashing,
Hmm.
and like I'm not really, and so a lot of times we don't get long workouts on
Hmm.
purpose by design. But I've never really experienced that symptom. I don't know if
Hmm.
you have, but so I'm just looking forward to like trying something longer because there was like a lot of times in competition, we get really short workouts. And so I've never really been able to flex that like good engine that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. I only neuro crash if I come out too hot.
Yeah.
So I have to learn to kind of find that sweet spot where I can kind of hold at that pace, and then the last 5 minutes send it and crash out by the time the clock
Yeah.
beeps out. Um, so what does a adaptive Hyrox look like? How did you register for it? How is it being adapted for you? Just in case
You
someone
know,
wants to do one.
to be honest with you, I'm kind of going in as like I'm going to be the one that kind of shares this out with a lot of people when I
Okay.
find out, because they haven't been completely responsive to my questions, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to pave the way and like and then kind of do like a wrap up post after to kind of share what I learned as from the adaptive experience of how they changed it for me and kind of what that process was like. Because there are going to be some movements that I can't do. I can't lunge, for
Yeah.
example. I can't do. I did see something in the rule book where if you can't lunge, you can use a crutch. But again, kind of back to that seated athlete conversation we were having, I don't use crutches in my everyday life, so I'm not going to buy them to
Yeah.
do high rocks. And so I'm hoping that they'll just let me walk with the bag.
Yeah.
But I am taking a little bit of a risk, like spending the money to go do high rocks, not knowing what my modifications may or may not be. But there's not too many. Like the machines are fine. The running again, I'll get it done. I'll walk a little bit. Um, the lunging is really, I think, the only one that's a little bit up in the air for me.
Okay. And do you know your run distance? Do they trim the run at all? Because I think it's an 8K.
300, 350 meters per lap
Oh,
or per round
that's much more bearable. That's
instead of like
2,700 versus,
yeah.
yeah.
And it was taking me in practice at the gym. I fell once. It's going to be inevitable. I'm going to fall. um, in practice, it took me about 4 minutes, which was pretty equivalent to what my husband would run the regular distance.
Okay.
So I think it'll be okay. But again, I'm going to be really tired doing it over and over because it's that one movement that's
Hmm.
repeated, which kind of stinks.
Yeah.
But we'll see what happens.
Are you and your husband doing it together?
No, he's going to just come and be support.
Okay. Nice.
And video camera.
Nice. Well, we'll definitely
Yeah.
have to have you on again to hear about that experience, because I think
absolutely.
Adaptive Hyrox is a place that a lot of CrossFit athletes, especially in Europe, are starting to try it out because it really kind of has grown in Europe quite a bit. All right, I've got a lightning round for you. Are you ready for it?
Sure.
Okay. So back to Hyrox. If you had to do one Hyrox station for the entire competition, what Hyrox station would you do?
Wall balls.
Wall balls. Okay.
Yeah.
That would be 800 wall balls.
Yeah. Bring it on.
That's a lot of Karens.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I love it. You are king for a day, and you can put whatever music you want on in the gym. What music are you playing?
Like Disney songs.
Whoa. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Hit me.
But like mixed up, like not just the originals. Like, have you ever heard Phil Collins come on during a workout? Like the Tarzan.
Have you ever listened to the Tarzan soundtrack when you're trying to get work done? Because it fires me up.
It fires me up so much when that drum comes in. Yeah. Oh my God. It's great. I'm probably the only person that would ever say Disney songs, but
I don't think you're the only person who say Disney songs. I do think you might be the only person outside of me who would say Phil Collins on Tarzan. Like he didn't have to do that, but he did that.
He did
for
that.
all of us.
Yeah, he did.
I love that so much. All right, I've got one more. If there's one movement that you could just eradicate from CrossFit forever, what would it be?
Thrusters.
Oh God,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Barbell specifically. It's funny. I don't mind dumbbell thrusters, but barbell thrusters I despise.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this lightning round. I just have to say, Phil Collins just really, that was the win for me right there. Me too.
I'm going to listen to it.
I'm going to go put it on in the... Next time I'm coaching a class, I'm just going to be like, boop. And they're going to be like, what's happening right now? I said, just settling, guys.
Yeah, just wait for it.
Yeah. Okay. So final two questions. If someone new to adaptive CrossFit or who's curious about adaptive CrossFit is listening to this, what's the best piece of advice you'd give them?
Don't be afraid. Just don't be afraid and don't get in your head because nobody cares what it looks like. I think for so long, I was just really afraid to try different things because it looked different. But it's just like, nobody cares. Like everybody, and I don't mean nobody cares. Everybody cares and wants you to succeed, but nobody cares about your disability or your impairment. You care more than anybody else cares. And so if you can let go of that, like anything is possible. And the people in the CrossFit space just want to cheer you on and be successful. I've never been around like a more supportive group of people. So, just walk through the door. That's really the hardest part.
Yeah, that's so true. True. All right. And then finally, if you could encourage a younger version of yourself, what would you say to them?
I would say that I would need to be just like kind of not get over my insecurities but just carry myself more confidently through the world because I do have a lot to offer and I do have a great story. And I think I've been really shy and timid in the past. And again, it comes back to CrossFit. Like CrossFit's just made me carry myself through the world in a lot more confident way. I hold my head higher. Like, I don't care if somebody stares at me when I walk into a room, like let them, it's okay. Like they can ask me, I'm not going to be offended. Like they can ask me a question if they have a question or they're curious. I've just hid myself for far too long. And like, that's what I would say.
I love that, Sydney. Thank you so much. Thanks for being on the podcast. It was such a joy having you and having this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, I'll see you after the Hyrox competition.
Yeah, definitely. Can't wait to tell you all about it.
I can't wait to hear about it. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Adaptive Athlete Podcast. I really enjoyed Sydney's resiliency, her commitment to pushing boundaries, and her perspective on strength and self-confidence. Whether you're an adaptive athlete yourself, a coach, or just someone looking for motivation, we hope this conversation reminded you that progress comes from showing up, doing the work, and embracing the journey. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to connect with Sydney on Instagram at Sydney_Peterson and check out her work with EverAdapt Nutrition. And as always, if you found value in today's conversation, subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode. share it with a friend, tag us on social media, and help us grow this incredible community. Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Hotho, and I'll see you next time.